Hi, my name's Bob Greener and I'm a volunteer with the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project. So thank you for joining me this Sunday. I am very happy to do this presentation. It's something I've been wanting to talk about for a long time. And I'm listening to myself over here, so I'm going to pause that. My audio is working. How funny. Okay, hi Artifact Core Key. I hope you're with us at the Baroness, and hi Gordon and Common Misconceptions. Okay, so it might be a little bit messy, as sometimes these things are, because there's a lot of material I wanted to put into this and prepare nicely, but at this stage, it's best to get things out of the door. Otherwise, they're just going to pile on top of each other. So I think what happened this week with looking at the VEGA Valley Eastern Plateau really demystified a lot of what's going on with these ball lightning structures, in my view. These itonic clusters, these exotic vacuum objects, ectons, the Urzions, all of the different names that have been given to them over the years, and we're getting a deep insight into their life cycle, as it were, and the modes of clustering and declustering, let's put it like that. And with this in mind, I revisited a couple of images I took, which I will share with you, of a very, very famous sample, what I'm calling the sword in the stone, and I'll come on to more to why that is. But I also analysed another sample, and before I go there, I want to look at the early work of Takaaki Matsumoto and look at this in reference with the discussion point today. So, is everyone hearing this? Hi Lowlands, Pete. Hi Markle Marsden. Thank you for joining us. It's very good to have you here with us. So let me just load up Takaaki Matsumoto's steps to the discovery of electronuclear collapse, which you can all make sure you have in front of you, because you can download it from remoteview.icu. And I will go and get that now. And we will get to the right page. And I think the right page, whilst that's loading up, is it's one of his early papers, very early papers, and it is the microscopic observations of palladium used for cold fusion. This one, and it's the one where he did a cold fusion experiment and then cut the electrode in half and found that material had been eaten away on the inside of the sample. And so now I can show that on the screen. I don't have to wave this around. So let's go there. Excellent, Diadon. Excellent. Yes, it was so all clear earlier that I was listening to myself on a bounced recording. So if I had an assistant, they could... well, you're all assistants. You're all there helping this process move forward. Okay, so I'm going to kill whatever the one is that's listening to me. It's over here. Good. Excellent. Right. So we shouldn't have any issues there. And I'm going to look at Matsumoto here, and we're going to go there, and we're going to go 2 pages around about 108. I think it is 108. 108. So thanks again for Dr. Takaaki Matsumoto's sharing of his work and permitting me to make this one-for-one copy. And note, we are remastering it as well in latex for a reprint, along with missing papers that I think are important and extra detail. Okay, so here it is. So these are the palladium electrodes, and they were cut in half, and inside he found that the crystal grains had been consumed to a certain degree, and when this was looked in further detail, he found that these actually started out as circular sections on the grain boundary that then ate and then joined into each other until they started to consume along the grain boundary, and you see these round sections taken out of the grain boundary. And it was, I think, some time after this, because this paper was in submitted 21st of September 1990. It was quite some time after this that he had a conversation with Ed Lewis, and Ed Lewis got him onto the topic of condensed plasmoids, and that they were effectively ball lightning. And then it fitted what his observations were with these circular pieces of material consumed within the metal. And you can see how that is. And so he has this diagram for how it sort of occurs on the grain boundary, and then it kind of eats around the grain boundary and it starts consuming a whole grain until you end up with grain-shaped defects within your material. And this ends up by disheveling or sort of disintegrating your material's integrity. Okay, and so this is ball lightning, effectively changing the integrity of your material. And actually in later papers, I don't know whether I can go to them immediately, he looked at the elements that are synthesized when this occurs, and you can see it here. Thanks for your donation, Dardon. Can we find a supply source for nuclear emulsions films? That is something I've been interested to think about for some time. Yes, I think we should probably do that, but then it's a case of how do you develop them and so forth. But yeah, that's a good one. If people want to look into that would be really useful if we can find us nuclear emulsion films. Okay, so these are, he calls these grain-shaped defects, but they look a lot like a strange radiation track. But leaving that to one side, here's one of these things, and this was, I think, what was it in? It was in hydrogen atoms were charged into palladium metal by electrolyzing heavy water mixed with 3% sodium chloride. A palladium rod of this length and diameter was used as the cathode, with a helical wire for the anode. So, okay, so it's palladium in heavy water, so palladium deuterium system. And if you look here, you've got some 6 lithium, some helium, some tritium, so you know there's a possibility here. But he's seeing neon and a range of elements here. So we got ruthenium and indium, okay, and further on from that, we have our usual suspects coming out of Lena with one of these kind of structures, and this is sodium. Well, there was sodium chloride in there already, so we can not give that too much importance. Magnesium, aluminium, silicon, sulfur, calcium, and copper. Down here we've got silicon, sulfur, and calcium, and down here we have magnesium, aluminium, silicon, phosphorus, sulfur. Obviously palladium was in there to begin with, potassium, calcium, titanium, and iron, aluminium, iron, and zinc, aluminium, silicon, chlorine was in there to begin with, potassium, calcium, and iron, and aluminium, sulfur, potassium, and calcium. So you can see that calcium, as usual, features in Lena experiments, and I've discussed about this, being that it is a alpha conjugate nuclei, and it is the largest pure alpha conjugate nuclei in the form of DEC alpha, the potassium 40, calcium 40 rather. And there was this additional piece of data by Rodionov and Savatimova that out of this coherent matter system, it favors isotopes from elements, element isotopes that have 0 spin, and calcium 40 has 0 spin. So it's very logical that it would do that, and many of the isotopes, in fact all of the isotopes except for iron 57, have 0 spin as well. So you're starting to see additional sort of concepts about what you get out of a system. And we included spin some years ago, or at least a year and a half ago, I think, into the MFMP reaction calculator that was inspired by Dr. Alexander Parkhomov's calculations early on. Okay, so, right. So that's eating away at material. And I don't know if you recall, we also showed this on the copper sample, which was in the VEGA experiment by Henk Juren, which I have here. This has a 10mm ball lightning segment taken out of it. And we've studied this in detail. But also in there, it was on the grain boundaries where this thing occurred. Takaki Matsumoto says very specifically in a paper which is on, which I wanted to talk about in the last presentation, but I didn't get to it, or the one before last. And it's on page 176 onwards, experiments of 1-point cold fusion. And it's this diagram here. And it's talking about his experiments, and he used, I think, copper in this experiment. And unlike the reasons that I've given for copper, like its high conductivity and the fact that it produces copper oxides, which in a plasma scenario produces photoelectric effect. So as the EVO is condensing, energy comes out of that stimulates the production of photoelectrons from the copper oxide, and that feeds the EVO, so you have a bit of a virtuous cycle. So that's going on in the VEGA experiment. But in his experiment, he used copper because it has a sea of electrons on its surface, if you have it like as the cathode, but it doesn't like to absorb hydrogen. And so if you have a scenario where it is the cathode, it is then going to have a lot of hydrogen ions coming towards it when the electrolysis process is going on in this instance. And it's going to have a sea of electrons. So you have protons and electrons trying to bunch together at the surface interface, not just the surface, but also the crystal grain boundaries. And this leads to electron bunching, and it leads to the hydrogen cluster formations. And this paper actually is from, how should we put it, it was submitted on October the 20th, 1992. And so here is the diagram that is in there, and he talks about where you could just have a basic hydrogen cluster down here, and this leads to quad neutrons, proton emissions, which was observed by Piantelli, but I believe also by Langmuir in the 1910s from his heated tungsten filaments. For helium, this is the classic reaction, and we talked about from the Rodionov and Savatomova paper that you don't get so much 3 helium as you would expect from a normal deuterium fusion because of that 3 helium has spin, whereas 4 helium doesn't. So this explains the error in branching ratios that you see in Lena. Is one explanation for it. And dineutrons coming out here. So the quad neutron and dineutron leads to very specific nuclear reactions, and obviously they're neutral, so they can go into atoms without any Coulomb barrier. So this would actually lead to more standard nuclear reactions. And in fact, in Piantelli's patents, he talks about interacting protons that come out, I think, about 6.7 MeV. They're ejected, I believe, from a cluster violently because of Coulomb repulsion. And so it's its own accelerator. And he used either boron 11 to carbon 12 reaction, or the original Cockcroft and Walton reaction of firing a proton into lithium 7 going to beryllium 8 and decaying into 2,4 helium. And so that's the chosen elements, but there was never really a satisfactory explanation until more recently as to why that proton should be ejected. And then you can have a much larger cluster where you get multiple neutrons coming out, and then these very much larger clusters. And when you actually look at this, it looks a little bit like what we were looking at on the VEGA Valley, where you have these things that can join together into toroids. Let's say it's like this one, but then the toroids can then amass and organize themselves into this crenellated sphere, and there's something going on inside that, and from that you get all of these wonderful other things going on. Note, this is the cathode, and this is the copper, and surface defects like this crack here would enhance the process of formation. And this was all detailed very, very clearly by George Messias in his ecton theory, which was developed, I think, in the 70s into the 80s, but it only first was published in the West, I think, in 1996. And he was told at that conference by, I think, Hal Fox, or shortly afterwards, sorry, mate, but Ken Shoulders has already published this, and he calls them exotic vacuum objects, or EVs at that time. Okay, so then you have breakups, and you see this mess that we see, and this tiny black hole is the kind of some of the things that I believe that we've seen, and the white hole ejector and so on, and these are the things that he was thinking of at the time. But for me, the most important structures or outcomes is that it's able to consume matter and transmute matter, and maybe even do full electronuclear collapse. Okay, right. So we've actually replicated what Matsumoto has shown here, and another sample which I may or may not have with me here. Let me have a look for our show and tell. No, I can show you on the on this here. Let me do it here. So these are the MFMP Hutchison samples, and we received these, I believe, at the end of 2017. I might be wrong with that, but I think it was then. So thank you, John, for allowing us to acquire these. That was a seminal moment in this journey. And some of the ones that we've talked about a lot is the ball burn sample. And again, we can definitely conclude that this is a surface. And I called it ball burn because it looked like ball lightning burn from my understanding at that time. So it's always been called that. And then we looked at this fracture sample, and that's been studied in detail. Now, when I've discussed this fracture sample, which if we go here, this is chaos, which is more of the same. This is the fracture sample where we actually took the images that allowed us to derive the potential structure of an exotic vacuum object at 3 different levels of quantization. And I proposed that on 17th of February 2020. And we saw it for the first time in physical coherence collapse form on the VEGA Valley Eastern Plateau this week. This was very, very revealing, this particular sample, but it also showed that it skins the surface, and we saw the same skinning going on in line reactor. And so Matsumoto's theory that it's not a bulk phenomena, but it's a surface or crystal grain boundary phenomena, I think is highly accurate, because this is a place where you get the opportunity for electron bunching. And so I've argued that something that produces this chaos structure here, as we call it. If I zoom into it, you can see how the pieces, they were obviously in one likely extruded piece of aluminium, and it might be drawn as well. And what that leads you to get is long crystal grains. And if you can imagine, the exotic vacuum objects are going in there, and they're, as I've just showed you in Matsumoto's work, they're finding their way to be growing at crystal grain boundaries, and that these have a monopole-like nature, and they also have this process in paramagnetic metals like aluminium of churning it around and moving a little bit, because they're not so locked in place by the magnetic nucleus. They can move around and cluster a little bit more readily, so you get jellification. What happens is you get an overall chunk which ends up as one kind of pole, and then another one is next to it, and then the whole thing just kind of breaks up and reorganizes itself. Like if you had a load of pieces of if you had a load of neodymium magnets, those disc-shaped magnets, and they were not very strong, but they got stronger and stronger, but they were misaligned, they would all align themselves. And in fact, sometimes they can do it so violently that they'll smash up and reorganize into a blob of broken neodymium magnets because they're quite brittle. And so I believe that kind of thing is going on in here, and maybe we're going to see something along those lines. So the other sample we're going to really refer to tonight is this knee sample. I've wanted to look at this for a very long time, and I guess the main reason for that, if I can get it here, sample 20. So that's the coral twist, but down here is that I noticed this very typical type of triangular structure on the break line that I've seen in a number of different systems, and it would appear that it is the golden triangle ratio, and I believe it's somehow related to the system that creates the pseudo-monopole like structures. So I'm just going to kill my Bluetooth here. Is it my Bluetooth? No, my Wi-Fi, because it's killing my mouse. Okay. And so I had an opportunity, just a quick one, with the SEM session to have a look at the end of this. And in fact, I ran out of time, and I have some a tile of images that didn't fully tile, and we'll try and tile it tonight. But there's some key things in there that I want to look at. Okay, so I want to talk about some things. I haven't actually got the references here, and maybe I'll do a blog and I'll link the references in. But I've talked about how Ken Shoulders, in his 2010 interview with John Hutchison, filmed by Nancy Lazarian, which I had the opportunity to transcribe, and you can go and see that on the Steemit channel. He said that the most easy way that people can experience exotic vacuum objects is the spark that comes from your finger when you've built up static. And I think pretty much everyone that's of a conscious age will have experienced this at some point. And so out of your fingers comes these sparks. And he says every spark has an exotic vacuum object leading the charge, as it were, into free space. And it's a self-propelling thing, and that comes into how it can be used for propulsion and so forth. And there is this whole field of, we know now that they can travel along grain boundaries and influence metals and allow the grain boundary to slip and the matter to reorganize. And in light of that, I am going to go to another of my transcriptions, which was of a CIA document talking about the work of Hal Puthoff and others in the Psi-kinetic research. So let me just find that. And in fact, Dr. Alexander Parkhomov was the sort of on one of the teams of the Soviet type of research that would be similar to that which featured in Men That Talk to Goats, or whatever, it's Stare at Goats. So give me a second to find that link here. And what it was, they had these PK parties, and they were able to get reasonably normal people, if there's ever such a thing, and they were able to teach them the mechanisms of being able to bend metals. So I've actually reconstructed this CIA Freedom of Information document, and I did a recording of it. And so it's the PK party history, and this is from December the 19th, 1983. And it's about getting a point of concentration in your head, make it very intense, and focus, grab it and bring it down through your neck, down through your shoulder, down through your arm, through your hand, and put it into the silverware at the point you intend to bend it. Command it to bend. Release the command and let it happen. Okay? So if you think about Kirlian photography and the fact that you have these sort of electrical kind of things coming out of your fingers. And I've talked about how the lotus position is, in my view, a very deliberate way of sitting, so that you have emissions from your fingers and they are able to create a vortex that ends up putting a focal point into your spine area, which as you energize it and bring it up, it comes up through your body. And as I very readily admitted that I thought all this stuff was bonkers for the vast majority of my life, and I apologize for being so ignorant. But anyway, these things are emitted from your fingers, okay? And what this, to me, here is suggesting is that there is the ones that come from your fingers have a conscious connection to you. You are able to control them. Now, what I've talked about with the work of Rodionov and Savatomova is they're saying that the things that are able to be manipulated span the entire universe, and they go without us and within us, and they travel through other materials. And you might liken this to, if it's captured in the metals, as we know it would appear from many authors' work, that it can be captured in and on metals. So, for instance, I refer to Bogdanovich's work, where the team at Moscow Nuclear Physics Institute were doing plasma flow discharges onto metal, and they found these tori moving around, recorded them on video up to 2 days after the discharge onto the metal. When that was released in 2019, a guy from the US said, actually, we saw these things when we were doing electron beam processing of classified landing gear, which is now declassified. But at the time, they found these glowing things on the metal landing gear, and they were persisting. And they didn't know what they were, but, you know, to deliver the landing gear parts, these electron beam hardened, interesting, landing gear, they would brush off these glowing spots on there. And after the release from Moscow in 2019, they went back to the person that talked about this and asked them, you know, did you investigate that? And they said, yes, well, we found them still glowing up to 2 months later. And so this actually fits with other work by Savatomova, where there seemed to be, and John Dash, where there seemed to be transmutation occurring over a period of time, in fact weeks and maybe months. And this also fits with some of the claims made by John Hutchison, where there were claims of material changing over time. Okay, and so, but what I'm saying is that the things that come out of the fingers, we know now produce the same tracks as strange radiation. And I've discussed this before, how Keith Fredericks took an neodymium magnet and a X-ray, a radiographic emulsion, and he put his fingers on it, and he was able to generate many of the tracks associated with strange radiation. So you have a one-to-one correlation between emission from people's fingers and strange radiation and observations of what ball lightning can do. Okay, so what I am saying, therefore, is that the material that exists already has a lot of these things in it. And metal will accrue them from the environment because if it's paramagnetic or magnetic, it will accrue them from the environment. Okay, and if it's conductive, it will also accrue them from the environment. But they're kind of disorganized and they don't quite know what to do. When you put the ones that you generate from you, I believe that they are consciously linked. And why do I say that? I say that because there's this guy in Austria. I haven't got the reference for you. I meant to have it when I did this presentation, but I haven't got the reference for you. But I will find it and I'll put it into the blog. And I think it's from Austria. And what they did is they took some saline solution and they had it in a single container, and they asked people to take standard syringes, choose one out of a box, and take a syringe full of this water each. And then they would touch the water with their finger that's on just about coming out of the end of the syringe. And they would put like 4 or 5 spots on a glass, like Petri, not Petri dish, maybe a glass microscope slide. And then they would let them dry out and crystallize. And what they found is that for every individual person, they had a unique crystal pattern. But for the single person, the 4 or 5, however many crystallization patterns that were there, they were largely very, very similar, if not moving towards identical, in as much as it can be in a process like that. And the implication is, therefore, that something was coming out of the people's fingers that was able to interact with the crystal formation process, okay, and leading to a unique pattern to them, which was different for every individual person, but there were multiple instances of that, okay? So I have one proviso on this. And that is that there's a guy, again, I would have had the reference for you, but you can go and look him up. This will be easy for you to look up. And hopefully I don't get a copyright strike for mentioning the name here, because it's controversial at the moment. But Disney had a guy who was the world expert in the understanding of how snowflakes form. Now, most people will probably be under the misconception that all snowflakes are unique, okay? And essentially, they generally are, because there's statistical variations that always lead to different branching types. And there's very many more types of snow than when I watched this little documentary. There's very many more types of snow than even I thought was possible. You've got these rod and cone ones, and not rod cone ones, but rod ones, and the things that don't look like normal snowflakes. But you can switch between these different modes of growth by changing the temperature, the water vapor density, the pressure, and so forth during the cycle. And he's developed a technology where he can precisely control the parameters and predictably grow crystals of a particular shape, which, as they grow, he can change the parameters and know what happens when the crystal goes to the different state. So why am I telling you all this? Well, firstly, it's interesting because everyone loves the film Frozen, or at least if you're a parent, you might have been annoyed by your children singing "Let it go, let it go." Anyway, he became the expert for developing the snowflake procedural technology for the Frozen series of films. Okay, and so that's the level of detail sometimes people go into 3D animation. It's a passion of mine, so it was interesting to see. But that tells you something, that if you have a set of parameters that change in the same way for a crystal that is forming, then the crystal can form a largely predictable structure. Why is that important? Now you see the point of me telling it. Because each of those persons that touched that salt crystal water and then put it on their microscope slide had its own little universe for that microscope slide. What do I mean by that? I mean that microscope slide is a thing that is, to a degree, averaging out the temperature. It has its own local environment wherever it was placed in the room in where it was drying out. And so it could be that the crystals forming, or the crystal patterns forming for a particular microscope slide from a particular individual actually has more to do with the parameter space through the development of the growth of the crystal for that microscope slide than it does for the fact that the person touched it. So that is my proviso, and so I have to put that out there. It's never, in my view, been discussed, or my understanding, been discussed by the person making the claims. But I think there could be an influence, one or the other. It could be that the seed, the conscious intent, whether intent or not, but the resonance from the DNA of the person that did the touch may have played a role in that. Now, on the flip side, there is the work of Uri Geller, and of course Uri Geller joined the Psychic Spy program, and there's controversy surrounding that. That's fine, but it was Uri Geller's sort of influence there that I believe led to the PK parties and so on. And it's not an isolated incident, because the world's leader of one of the world's leading experts of ball lightning, Dr. George Egli out of Hungary. He was actually approached by Bernie Heisch, and Bernie Heisch was a colleague of Hal Puthoff, and he was approached in, I think, 1983, or 1980 certainly, because of the association with ball lightning with Dr. George Egli and his studies spanning 100 or plus more years of anecdotes. And of course they were very interested in that. And if you follow where Hal Puthoff is today, and George Hathaway, colleagues in the Sapphire Project and Orient Technology, then you will know that they are looking at double layers and coherent matter and things that are related to ball lightning. And so it's a continuum of research. And of course, it was 10 years working for the chicken guy where Ken Shoulders was funded to do the analysis of what John Hutchison did. Okay, so in that instance, you have this guy, and if you actually look at, I think it's the 2006 MIT lecture from Ken Shoulders to the cold fusion community, and I think it's that, and he's talking about cold fusion, John Hutchison effect, and so on. There's, I think, slide 3. He actually shows a picture of Bernie Heisch, and I think it is Bernie Heisch is literally holding up this sample here in that picture, this exact sample, okay? And he's looking at it like this. All right, I think, no, it might be the one that's quite similar to this, but it's broken into 2 pieces. And the sample that we're going to look at today is also owned by the collector that has handed this to me very graciously. But anyway, but Bernie Heisch visited, so that you see how this is all connected. And so it wasn't just that Dr. George Egli had looked at ball lightning for a couple of decades. He had actually already travelled, or either already or subsequently, he travelled to Israel, where it wasn't just Uri Geller. There were other teenage boys, typically, that were able to bend spoons. And it was their party trick. And I remember Dr. George Egli saying that one of the interesting things was when you are near these people, you can't use electronic equipment. And moreover, timepieces don't seem to work correctly. And if it's a timepiece, maybe at that time might have used a quartz oscillator in it, then that stands to reason, because the quartz oscillator probably would be severely affected. And in fact, any semiconductor would have been severely affected, and possibly even magnetic recording devices. So there's a lot of reason to expect that this wouldn't work. So it's not just Uri Geller. It's the fact that that led to the PK parties, but the fact that the ball lightning is all completely wrapped up in this. And then when we look at the CIA's conclusion of what happened, they were saying that effectively, when they analysed the areas of the bent metal, they found, and here's their diagram in this document, and it says here, how should we put this? In the metal, the grain boundaries become very hot, possibly even molten. This is a suggestion. Is it heated? I don't know. But anyway, this is the suggestion for explaining how they can slip. When a large proportion of the metal has soft grain boundaries, the grains are free to slip or float, and metal temporarily loses its rigidity. This only happens for several seconds because the heat is conducted away from the grain boundaries as they re-solidify. Often, people feel this sudden hardening of the metal while they are easily forming it. Sometimes the metal becomes so hot internally that a gas is formed, which is believed to be the source of the loud pop often heard when an object is being warm-formed breaks. Twice, the plating of silver-plated forks has split apart by itself with loud pops when being held by only one hand. Metal that has been annealed or cast is very difficult to form. This further supports the idea that dislocations play a role in the process of concentrating the thermal energy into the grain boundaries. I don't think this is thermal. I think it's non-thermal. Of course, when you are condensing matter into a coherent structure, there will be an output of thermal or energy that can be down converted to thermal energy. But I don't believe it's at the level that it's melting those grain boundaries and you don't perceive it because it immediately goes into the rest of the metal. I believe that the exotic vacuum objects are forming in the grain boundaries, as we have observed in VEGA experiments, and as we have, as Matsumoto observed 2 decades before us, 3 decades before us, 3 decades before us, and so anyway, and what they're suggesting here is that there's an intention from the person that dumps energy in. No, what I think it is that this thing is already inherent in matter. This is the hidden energy in matter. And what you do is you put more in from you, which finds its way into the most likely place that it would find itself, and you have a conscious connection to that material, and it can help organize the material to act in a particular way. So that's my hypothesis for now, and that then this allows the slipping of the metal. So what I'm talking to you about right now is a technological process which can also be accompanied with psychic ability. And the astute of you might understand where I'm going for the name of this presentation. Anyway, there are other ways that people will recognize in various areas of life. I've talked about meditation and creating the vortex around yourself. There is the laying on of hands. And this has been a belief in many religious groups that if one is to heal someone, they actually have to physically lay on the hands. And these exotic vacuum objects, they do travel in the air, but they don't travel that far. And people do have an aura around them. There is a field beyond which it's like your personal space. And if anyone's ever felt in love with someone, that frisson when you get together and there's that contact, there is that mutual incredible intent, which really only gets realized by the other party when there is the physical hands laid on. And I'm sure, and I would hope that everyone in their life has experienced this at some point. It is part of the magic of the human condition. And I believe that this is intense intent of one spirit into another spirit by the coherent structures that we emit from our fingers, which I've said, all of the evidence suggests that this is going on, and you can record this physically on X-rays. And as I said, Keith Fredericks has done that, taking forward the claims by Ken Shoulders. And if you have an intent and you are a person that is in contact with this, so if or you have good control of this. So, for instance, if you are the Uri Geller, not of metal bending, but you're the Uri Geller of so-called faith healing, you can intend to go into that entity, and in this case, it's actually an organic being, and intend for that person to be in a better state. Okay, so. And then there's the concept of joining hands, both on greeting, and I think that the shaking of hands is not as intense as connecting with your soulmate or your loved one. I think it's like it's like an agreement that and recognition of the other person, and it was with great sadness that I saw the suggestion that one shouldn't be shaking hands in the recent years, because I think that is absolutely critical to human bonding, and the idea that, you know, it was just sad. It was just really sad, and I hope that maybe people don't carry forward some of that desire to avoid contact. Because we are creatures that, in my view, give a contract, have a contract when you contact. And so taking that back into the kind of religious realm, where people, if you've been in church and you want to increase the collective intent, you are often asked to join hands with the people around you. And in fact, often you will be asked to join into circles and join each other's hands. And if you can imagine that you are a very different being, but you are able to, in the spoon bending sense, in this sense, be able to influence matter that's already in the metal. Okay? If you are able to agree and your collective will is allowed to cohere, and your collective intents are able to cohere by contact, I think there is a real thing there. And it cannot be denied, in my view, why things happen. Why did people decide that in those moments when you are how shall we put it? You are wanting to create an intense intention to create a particular action. Why did people feel that they needed to join hands? And I think it's for this reason. And I think it's also, the power of the hug properly intended. You can feel isolated, you can feel in despair, and if someone intends for you to feel better and they hug you, I believe that you really do gain some energy from their spirit that really does help you. And likewise, when you are elated and you are so happy because something has gone so well, and you just want to hug people because you're so happy you could cry, it's like you've got an overabundance of pure, beautiful energy, and you want to share it. And I think these things are literally built into our spirit. And so what I'm trying to get with this particular thing is that we can communicate through this. And I believe it's not only at a local range. I believe this is long distance communication. And when I say that, if you love someone, and it's a genuine love, and when you do that, you allow them so for instance, let's say that your DNA, this is a concept I've had for many years. Your DNA is effectively your cryptographic key to your blockchain of your ancestry's capabilities. And that when you fall in love with someone and you're genuinely in love with them, and that is, you're completely open. You're open. And what happens at that moment, and it may actually be your dog, it may be your mother who's now dead, it may be your father who's now dead, or it may be your brother, or it may be Jesus or whatever. If you genuinely open your heart and love them, you give them access to you, your spirit. And I believe that the consciousness, and I talked about this briefly, about isolation and the fact that the relic neutrino condensate, which is effectively a single non-described atom. If it's a condensate, it's a coherent condensate. It spans the entire universe. Okay, there is no, if something happens here, it will be felt instantaneously in this coherent matter on the other side of the universe. If you are able to communicate with that condensate by means of the exotic vacuum objects, the condensed relic neutrinos or cold neutrinos that you imbue out of your fingers or out of your intensity of thought, that can be picked up by people that you have allowed into you. And it doesn't matter whether they are alive or dead. And so this might be a little bit strange for you. And so, but for me, it's I don't have a problem about dying at all. I love life. But I realize that if you are bound intentionally to people, be that your children, be that a real figure that you respect, then that will always persist. It will live on in eternity, and so it goes past death. It goes past death. So these are some concepts, and I talked about the horrible thing of isolation in my talk in my Q&A to the APEC group last night. Essentially, my views on solitary isolation. If you are in a room where it's a small room, all life uses this relic neutrino flux. It is a flux, and you can consume it, and you will, if you lose access to the diffuse and raining down from the cosmos part of this flux, you literally lose contact with reality. And I don't know who worked this out, or whether it's just, people found out that if they put people in a small box and didn't allow them access to the outside world, then they would lose contact with reality. And we know from the work of Dr. Parkhomov that this N radiation, this relic neutrino flux from the cosmos, it gets reflected by metal, but it can also get partially reflected by any dense material. So if you have, say, a prison cell which has a window in it, but it's glass, then it will be partially reflecting this microns to millimeter radiation. And over a period of time, you will consume it. And so you will literally lose touch with reality completely. You will lose your conscious link to all of your ancestors, all the people you love. And so I will talk about this in my blog at some point, about the experiment that I did. In fact, I think I have already. When I was 19, I did an experiment on myself, and I learned this, but I didn't know really how it was occurring. So it was with horror, absolute horror, that I saw the suggestion that we should not go out and socialize in these last 2 years. And the level at which that damages the human spirit is beyond measurement. It's just, that can damage you on all kinds of levels. And so I am hopeful that they don't persist with this nonsense too much longer. I'm really feeling for the people in China at the moment, because it's just wrong. It's just wrong. At least in many cases they have balconies, so they won't be completely lost. But still, as I've argued, you need that physical contact. You need to be within the aura of other people. Okay, so we live in a universe where there is an exchange of photons all of the time. All of the time. We only see what we see in the world around us because photons are exciting atoms and partially absorbing or reflecting at other frequencies photons. Okay, so we have a complete interrelationship with our environment through energy, and this coherent condensate of cold neutrinos, of which I believe, or is probably the cause of gravity, but also, as I will share with you when I finish translating Shishkin's work, he believes that it is this flux of relic neutrinos from the cosmos that literally keeps atom electrons spinning. So it's that level of importance. Okay, so you need the flux, you need the connection with the environment. We evolved outside. We didn't evolve in a little box. And so with that said, I think basically what we are arguing here, and with the work of Takaaki Matsumoto, is that you can not only do this psychokinetically, you can do it technologically. And there's been a lot of discussion that John Hutchison had an influence over the system. And that might be the case, because maybe he intended something to happen. But, you know, I've seen the same things happen in purely technological systems. Where I believe John clearly had an advantage, and I feel I have a similar advantage in a way, is he's electrosensitive in that he can feel when the conditions are met for the effects to start happening. And he can feel when the resonant phenomena is getting to the right point, and it takes time. You didn't have anything happen in Suhas Ralkar's ultrasonically produced fuel until he'd processed it for something like 140 hours. Nothing happened. In many palladium deuterium systems, nothing happened until it was loaded for like 3 weeks. Okay, but what is it that was going on? Well, John used an AM radio tuned between stations. And when he started hearing the pops, that was a cue. But I don't think that was the only thing that he was feeling. I think he was feeling potentially the lower level of relic neutrinos in the environment around the experiment. And why do I say that? I've said it before, and I said it on the APEC talk last night. Alexander Shishkin, he found out about the birdies, these pseudomagnetic monopoles, these string vortex solitons, these cold neutrino condensates, which can carry ions, these black EVOs, as he gives credit to Ken Shoulders. He found them because in 2001 he had a water and oil emulsifier that he was contracted to make, something like that. And basically it was spinning around at a high rate of revolutions. And it had some sort of slats that went round like that, and the oil and the water would go in and it would produce an emulsion. And what he found was, when he was close to the device, he felt really ill. And being a nuclear scientist, he thought, well, I want to investigate why this is. And so he got some nuclear emulsions and he put them near the device, and he found they got exposed, they got fogged, but also they had these birdies on them. And then they went and found these in other systems as well. And other authors have found them as well. And they've characterized it, and they've shown that 1 hour of exposure to the peak flux from his cavitator would kill a man. It wouldn't kill them instantly. It would damage their physiology to a point that at some point they would get cancer down the line. And I've talked about this in a new form of penetrating radiation, which probably Barkla was trying to discover after he won the Nobel Prize in the early part of the 19th century. He called it J radiation and spent the last years of his life trying to work out what J radiation was. But anyway, this form of radiation can have enough energy when it falls apart. The particles, the ions in there that have been captured as it's traveled through other materials, like it's like a teleporter. When it blows up, they eject, for instance, the nuclei at such a velocity that they will destroy a red blood cell and they will do damage to a white blood cell, DNA damage to a white blood cell. So there's real risks involved with being close to this type of cavitation system. And I've said the fastest way you can do LENA is with an intense cavitation system. And we know this to be true because of the 1 hour exposure that Leclerc and his colleague had when they were, I think, at Naval Research Labs, and they produced all the elements in the periodic table. But I don't think it was just the radiation from the fissioning of the heavy elements, because they were a small percentage. I think they got a deep, intense flux of strange radiation. And the Russians have done, I think, 10 or 11 years of research now, and they've actually exposed mice, they've exposed other organisms to this, and they've shown how it can damage the physiology. Okay, so this is a real thing, it's just not generally accepted. It needs to be, though. And so he found that after a period of time, his cavitator stopped producing these string vortex solitons. And what he had to do to enable it to start producing them again was physically turn it off and physically move it to a different part of his lab. Okay? And what does that tell you? That tells you that there is a field or an event horizon around which the things that are doing the cohering into the coherent solitons of cold neutrinos, which can capture ions and teleport material through other materials, this system can only grab them within a certain distance away from the cohering structure. Now, the cohering structures are forming in the cavitation bubbles, right? The cavitation, whatever's going on in the cavitation, the yin-yangs, they can only cohere out to an event horizon, okay? Beyond that, you're requiring this superfluid condensate to diffuse into the now free of relic neutrinos environment. And this diffusion, I also talked about in the APEC presentation, I believe was shown, without knowing what it was, by Xu Wenju between 1989 and 1999. Particularly he had a brass sheet which had a weight on it, some strain gauges, and during a three-body alignment, like a solar eclipse or a lunar eclipse, they found that there was a sideways push. And I believe that this is because the relic neutrinos that not ordinarily come from every direction onto Earth, it misses the relic neutrinos. Not only does it miss, but there's like a lens, like a camera lens module effect where you've got your elements. It actually lenses more relic neutrinos from the cosmos. So you get an intense flux on the outside, and you get less because it's being screened, and then you get a diffusion, and this gives you your sideways push. And for me, that this is, along with the 1954, I think, observation of Maurice Allais, which is on the NASA's website. These for me are important indicators that the relic neutrino flux is the cause of gravity. And then you understand, if you understand that how a mesh of these pseudomagnetic monopoles in a yin-yang array over a cannonball could potentially negate the action of gravity on the mass of the cannonball. Okay, so I've gone over a fair chunk of things there. So just let me see if I've got everything through what I wanted to say. Okay. Okay, so and this for me is why it's so important to get outside. It's important to get outside every single day because you get not just the sunlight thing, the photons in the back of the retina, the interaction with photons that you don't get from unnatural lighting. It's this relic neutrino condensate flux. You need to be interacting with that, and you need to be interacting with other people. So I've done all of that that I wanted to say. Those are gonna be endpoints, so I'll put that down there. Okay. Yeah, there's a guy I met at a conference, an energy conference in Graz, and it's Dr. Thorsten Ludwig, who has a lab outside of Berlin, and he actually had got some very good videos of work that John did way back in the day, and has met John, and he was running an experiment where they are laser trapping single electrons, and they are asking people to change the spin on the electron, the up or down, down to up, down, and so on. And this is related to work that Hal Puthoff had done in the past. So I am of the understanding that is possible. So if you are able to influence the electron, and the exotic vacuum object is at least a coherent condensate of electrons, then if you are able to consciously influence the spin of one electron, you are able to manipulate the spin of a condensate, which acts as a macro version of that same electron. So what I'm saying is, if you have electrons that come out of you that you are already able to influence the spin of, because you already have a conscious connection to them, and they flow into a metal or they flow into another person, then your intention can influence those electrons that have come from you, and they can literally lead the action of the collective electrons that are available in the target body. Okay, and so this for me, like I say, if I was listening to myself, even well, maybe 15 years ago, I would think I was pretty bonkers. But the evidence is pretty clear that this is how it is, and you know, you can replicate it regularly, so it becomes a science then, doesn't it? So okay, so I think I've said what I need to say, and I'm going to put you on hold music because I need to go and relieve myself before we start looking at the sample analysis. And we're going to first look at the knee sample and what that tells us in context of what we've been looking at with the Matsumoto work, and then we will look at just the. I haven't taken SEMs of the what I'm calling the sword in the stone, and you'll understand why, if you haven't already, why I'm calling this presentation and that sample the sword in the stone soon, if you haven't already got it. And I've got microscopy of that, but it is my belief that I will get access to that sample. I visited the collector in Scotland in July last year, and I took this optical microscopy in the few moments that I had to do that. And already, in light of what we saw, the exotic vacuum object structures, these ball lightning self-organizing structures, I think that we can say that absolutely the reason that that sword in the stone is the way it is because of this same technology, and it becomes pretty clear and conclusive why that is. But I reserve judgment, total judgment, until I can get that sample under the scanning electron microscope, and we can put this to bed and move on. Okay, so if you'll just bear with me, I'm going to switch you over to the image here, and I'll be back in a little while. Okay, back with you. I have to say thank you for those people that have supported remoteView.icu and the project. If it hadn't been for you, we would never be here. And I'll let you know that I was nearly at my wit's end with my gout. And I went to a show yesterday, and I managed to get one of these tables that I've been looking at for many, many years that go up and down. So thank you to your donations. I was able to get that. But my gout was bad recently, partly because I've sat down for so long making this. And other things, and go and find out what colchicine does to your bowels. Anyway, with that said, that lovely topic, I will go and start looking at these samples. So if you just give me a second. Now, what happened in the session was I set up a tile map, as I said earlier, and we ran out of time, so I had to freeze it. So the tiles aren't actually assembled into a mesh. So we're just going to have to look around the segments of the tile when we come to that. Okay. Okay, we want to look here. Get my mouse working. Bear with me, I'll be with you. Talk amongst yourselves. Okay, so this is as it was placed on the stage in the 100 by 100 millimeter by 60 millimeter volume of the Phenom Pharos XL by Thermo Scientific. And this is the coral twist that you are seeing here, and this is the MFMP knee sample. And the area that's interested me for a very long time is this triangle here. There's another triangle there, but this is orthogonal to this one. So this one goes that way and this one goes that way. So I think that is interesting in its own right. But I wanted to understand if there was any change between the steel or iron of this area here and inside this volume here, and also whether there was any elemental changes, but also some of the potential structures that we might recognize. And like I say, it was a very quick session, but I want to share this now because I think it's already showing something that is useful for us to discuss. So let me just come back out of that. Okay, so I don't know how many people have seen the previous presentation. If there's a desire for for me to show particular images from that make the argument that is necessary, then I will do that. But this is kind of like on the area a little bit outside of the major affected area. So this is where there are, the start of the effect. And one could argue that there's some rust going on, but this area seems to be disrupted. But there's a couple of points here. There's almost this area here which looks a little bit like it is. Sorry, it's not going to allow me to switch. I should have put this into Photoshop. But there's almost like a kind of vortical structure here. And there are these maybe carbon and silicate type structures around. But it does look like this material is consumed to a degree. However, rust can look a bit like this as well. So we need to bear that in mind. We're coming to the head here of the cone. And as you come into it, you can see the disruption is increasing. This is the otherwise ordinary iron. So where you see this light color, this is it has partial BSD and partial SED. So the backscatter electrons, the BSD detector, the backscatter detector BSD, that shows you the elemental composition. And I think probably we've got about 80% of that. And then I think I've added in 20% of the secondary electron detector, the SED, and that gives us more information about the morphological structure, i.e. it gives you a sense of 3D relief in the sample. But what we're seeing here is that the light areas here are iron, and the grey areas here are possibly iron oxide, and so you've got a mixture of oxygen and iron in there, so it's a grey shade between them. But these blobs here and here and here are essentially very rich in carbon, and if you look at them, they kind of give the suggestion that they might have been influenced by sort of a vortical structure. They are a particular thing, but many people would just argue that, of course, these are just fragments. But here you can see something that looks like it's been influenced into the center, and you've got a structure in the middle there. But anyway, I will step to the next image here. And this is more interesting for me, and this is why I want to spend more time with this sample. So two reasons. One, if we look at the inside area here, there's two features that I think we need to consider. One is this is probably iron oxide growing from, or rust growing from the original surface, but it kind of mirrors the original surface. Here, this is more like the original surface, and when you look at it, it's somewhere between the side of a VEGA Valley with these segments chopped out. They go up to a point, come down, go up to a point, go down, go up to a point, go down, go up to a point, go down. This isn't a micro machined triangle that was come out of here. Something worked from the inside and did this job. And what might that thing be? Well, if I go back to the work of Matsumoto, and we need to go back to the previous early presentation, or early paper from 1991, I think it is. The first one that I showed you up here. Let me get to it. Somewhere here. No, it's too far. Is that too far? Give me a sec. Here, yes. You can see here this itonic cluster, this ball lightning structure, has taken this section out, and it's left this very particular shape. Okay? Now, what you need to understand, what we are seeing here, is a section through a palladium rod. And this is a crystal in the palladium rod. Okay? And you can see the scale here. This is 50 micron, this size across here. This is 10 micron across the sides here. So this is actually a 10 micron sphere. Now, I showed you the collapsed coherent wave function of a ball lightning crenellated sphere that was of the order of 10 microns and other scales in the last presentation on the analysis of the Vega Valley Eastern Plateau. And so you can imagine a point in here and a point in here, and they're growing and they're consuming the material around them and they are transmuting them, as he showed in later papers. And that this is just a 2D section that you're seeing the 2D section of. But you can imagine throughout this gap, there are multiple ones of these arranged. And if you can do the what that would do in the head, if you can work out in 3D what that would do in your head, you would have these very particular type of sections cut out of the material. Okay? So therefore, I am arguing, and I believe correctly, that if indeed this was made with the Hutchison effect, it is ball lightning. And the reason we are seeing this particular shape here, these very particular sections cut out, these very particular sections, is that each of these was an individual structure. And we can actually see remnants, I believe, of one of these structures. In fact, a number of these structures. Here is a rather beautiful example, here. Okay? And so we have the hexagonal structure, which you would expect to be forming, and we've seen this. There's slightly vortical type nature, and this central section here. And this is converted, and you will see that this here is largely carbon. Okay? And there's actually quite a few. Some are not so resolved, so I'm looking forward to analysing this further. There's another potential one here. And we will actually look on the tile that I did, and I think we'll find some more there. I've only had a brief look at it, but I think we'll find a lot more. So I believe that what we are seeing here, these scalloped sections on which this rust has latterly formed from when this was produced in the, I think it was either produced in the 2007, I think it was produced in 2007, so it's a good period on from that. But the rust grows from the surface, normal to it, and you know, rust is, I think, something like 10 times the volume of the iron that it actually interacts with, and so it has to crack and flake off, and you know, that is corrosion. But yeah, so I'm arguing that these structures here are the 3D equivalent seen as a landscape of what was observed by Takaaki Matsumoto in what he finally concluded at least 3 or 4 years later was the result of the equivalent of natural ball lightning. Okay, and I'm pretty certain of that, actually. So there we go. So I would argue that whatever caused this thing, and because they're all coming together and we know they wet together, this would have formed one macro cluster. Okay, it's doing its own work on a local level with these little you could call them I don't know, mining teeth, these little miners, but the overall effect is it will grow, consume material, convert some of it to gas, and this is what I believe was happening in the PK parties. In the grain boundaries, some of the material is converted into gas, and Matsumoto observed that in grain boundaries, and that will cause these cracking and explosions that were observed by the people at the PK parties. Isn't this like amazing? It's like humans can do this. You just have to know that it's possible. It's just cool. Okay, all right. With that little aside, I'm going to look now at the SEM. Let's see where that is. I will publish, there's a 44-minute video of me doing the analysis live, but I'm not going to put you through that now. You can see that afterwards. When you look at those, you'll see a lot more detail when I'm moving around the surface, and you'll know which part that I've just discussed relates to which part, so that'll help you with location. and orientation. Okay, so this is the Hutchison knee sample, sample 20, okay, on a Phenom workstation. And so I looked at this area here that we were just discussing, and it is mostly carbon and oxygen, as would be expected. Aluminium, well, that was synthesized by Takaaki Matsumoto. Silicon was synthesized by Takaaki Matsumoto. Sulfur was synthesized by Takaaki Matsumoto, and one would expect chromium and iron to be in a steel. Okay, so I don't think these were synthesized. And so all of these elements here can be synthesized by this process. Sulfur being double oxygen 16 goes to sulfur 32. Silicon is carbon and oxygen fused, and aluminium is somewhere between the two. Okay. In fact, if you get carbon and nitrogen fused, you get aluminium. Okay, that is a standard George Ohsawa ball lightning reaction, and so you know that is expected to be there. Okay. Now we're going to look at the black area here, which I speculated is going to be high in carbon. And we have 52% by atoms of carbon and 32% of nitrogen. So interestingly, there's 0 oxygen in here. There's literally 0 oxygen in here. So have I excluded oxygen? No, I've not disabled oxygen. So this is the kind of thing that you see at the center of one of these kind of active agents. You get this carbon-nitrogen mix. Now, of course, there's nitrogen in the air, so that could have been captured in. We have chlorine in there, which was observed in Matsumoto's experiment, but that we referred to, but the chlorine was already in the sodium chloride in the electrolyte. And then chromium and iron again. Okay, so that's looking right in the center, but you're seeing chromium and iron. The reason that it's important that there's chromium and iron in there, from my point of view, is that it indicates potentially that it is consuming some of the iron, and so you're getting the residual atoms in that consumption process. Okay. You'll also see on the other view these dark and mid-grey patches in a number of areas. Remind me if I don't go into that, and I'm going to look at that in much more detail when we move forward on this sample. Okay, so that is that particular sample. And did I do any more on that? I think I did. Why has it not got the line? Oh, it has got the line scans. Has it got the line scans? Oh yes, I've got the line scans. So I've got some line scans here. So now I'm looking at the edge of the triangle going in, and I'm going quite close here to these 2 structures, these 2 EVOs. There's a couple more over here, these sort of collapsed EVOs there. And what are we seeing as we go along that? Well, the average along the whole thing is 40% by atom concentration of carbon and 20% oxygen, a little bit of silicon, and interestingly, we see copper. Wow. Copper? Seriously? Copper? Right? Okay. So, this is what happens when you do a line scan here is it takes an area around that, okay, and it then rotates it and it gives you this image. So you can see our EVO kind of structure here. This is the area at the back end and so on. And what do we see? Well, on this boundary here, we see very, very high percentage of carbon, up to, I guess it's atom percent, 70% by atom of carbon. And the oxygen, if this is on the outside where it's mostly iron and there's almost no oxygen going on. And why is that important? Well, if you had very much smaller exotic vacuum objects embedded into the crystal grains as the aftermath of the Hutchison effect, then in my view, those are much stronger at wanting to grab onto oxygen. And therefore, you would expect a higher concentration of oxygen and a faster decaying process in a standard type of rust process. And it would appear that that's exactly what happens. So the oxygen is very minimal, but we get to crossing this boundary here, and we start to see a much higher concentration of oxygen into the affected zone. So this not only dustifies material, it accelerates corrosion. Okay, so the person that lent me the sample that was highly corroded, I don't blame him too much, because this is what happens. Again, on the outside of the material here, there is very little silicon, but we're on this point here. And what is that point? That point is literally, as soon as we come into the affected area, the silicon goes up. And for me, that's interesting, because the last sample, we found a higher amount of silicon. And that was also a finding that was made by George Hathaway in the 1980s, looking at the same sample that I looked at. Okay, so we don't see it on the metal on the outside, but in the affected area we do. Now, what are these two spikes with a bit in the middle? What are we looking at there? What are we looking at there? Oh my God, that is the EVO zone. So in the collapsed functions of the material that's consuming this isn't, in my view, a bit of carbon detritus. If this was organic, I wouldn't expect this to also contain so much silicon. Okay, it has a lot of silicon. There's not a lot of silicon in you and me. But there is a lot of carbon here in these structures that are doing the eating. And there is a lot of silicon in those structures that are doing the eating. Now, what is this peak here? This is chromium right on the edge. Now, what is this peak? This peak, okay? Where is that? Where is that? Well, is it in the center? Is it almost in the dead center of this structure? Is that some concentration of a particular element? Perhaps. But again, the chromium's much higher here. Now, I haven't looked into why that might be, but it might be that the iron gets consumed because of its magnetic nature, and the chromium gets left behind. So the chromium in the steel is much lower down here. It's like maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4% or something down here. But suddenly you get intense concentrations. And this is potentially a left behind element. And so you get a concentration of it. Yeah? Okay, so now down here we see the iron. The iron is very consistent, very high, nearly 100%. And then as we come across this area, what's this? What's this? This is just coming into the boundary. We come there and it basically drops in here. It's nearly at 0 in places. It's nearly at 0. And then copper is only on the inside surface. There's absolutely 0 copper whatsoever on the outside. Okay? And then you start to get into the affected area and you get copper. Now, what's interesting about copper is heavier than iron. Okay? So it would appear that some matter has been lost from this triangular section that was taken out of the Hutchison MFMP knee sample 20. And some of that matter was probably converted to lighter elements that went away as a gas, like as did in Takaaki Matsumoto's experiments, and as would appear to have done in the PK experiments of metal bending. And here we see that that would have been a loss of matter, but then there would also have been a concentration of matter. And what does that imply? That implies a yin-yang process, a maker and a breaker. Okay? So this for me is extremely interesting that we have this. And at this point, look, it's not like it's actually very high. There's 0 copper at all until, what's this point here? What's this point here? This point is, we're just starting to be where the EVOs are doing the work, and we go over here and it's all, there's lots of copper. Okay. And when I say lots, I'm not making it up. It's like, it's verging on 100% copper, but 0 on the outside. So I've said about this before that there's, when I was referring to the particular sort of 6 or 9 structure that was on the bull bone sample at I think it was 40 micron, and on which was produced in the 1980s. And on the other sample that we have, which is aluminium sample, is not in this sample set, but it is, I think it's 4 centimeters across. So it's a couple of orders of magnitude going on there. And that's exactly the same structure. Now, I said that it would be extremely unlikely that John Hutchison would know the structure to make, which matches structures that you find in nature, right? And then precisely machine them on one sample in 1986 or whenever it was, and then at many orders of magnitude larger, machine it on a sample in 2007, and inside those structures make a substructure that has these golden ratio triangle cut into it. For me, the level of impossibility of John Hutchison being able to create those things across multiple decades with such precision across multiple orders of magnitude is just completely bonkers to try and rationalize. And what I'm seeing here is something that is very, very similar to observations morphologically observed by ourselves and by Takaaki Matsumoto in completely independent experiments, but both absolutely related to ball lightning. And you know, anyway, that's my point. Okay, so yeah, so the iron disappears where the carbon is, and literally the iron is completely replaced by, or essentially replaced for the most part by copper in these particular areas here. And it would be interesting to find out if it looks to me potentially, and I will try and look at this in more detail. It might be on the ridge edges here, on the ridge, the apex of the mountain, where we have the copper spike. Maybe that is the case here. I don't know, but I will investigate that further. That's the initial indication. Like I say, I'm looking at this real time. Okay, so I did another line scan over here, and like I say, I will publish the video of this session as it was recorded. Full disclosure, and so people can point out if there was any errors made. Okay, and what we are seeing here actually is nickel. Okay. And this would be interesting to see where the nickel is. Now, if you take an alpha particle, which is 1/3 of carbon or 1/4 of oxygen, and you ram that into an iron atom, you get nickel. And if you take a proton and you put that onto nickel, you get copper. Okay? Nickel 63, sorry, not nickel 63, nickel 62 to copper 63, and nickel 64 to copper 65. You wouldn't expect to have a high amount of copper produced because nickel 62 and nickel 64 are relatively rare isotopes of nickel relative to things like nickel 58. Okay, so it's interesting that it is. I don't know. We'll see what we see. Okay, all right. So this is again. So the line scan is going down here. We're going from what we now know to be the iron-rich area across the carboniferous area over the area which may be more interesting and touching on what I believe is maybe rust at the back end. Okay. Okay. So here is carbon. So carbon is where the EVOs are doing their work. Not on the outside and not on all of the inside. It's just on that edge effect. The oxygen is basically, there's a little bit on a splodge on the outside, then next to nothing. And then as we go across the boundary, we have oxygen in there. There's a drop down. So yeah, this here where the rust is, I think that's pretty much what's going on there. Chromium, again, is level. There's a bit of concentration on this particular area on the inside, but not so much as we go out towards the rust. The iron collapses where there's carbon, up and down a bit in the middle, and then where the rust is, there's iron oxide, I guess. The nickel. Oh, okay. I've not seen this. I've not seen this. I'm reviewing this with you. Okay. Here's the nickel. Where is that nickel? Where is that nickel? tracing it up. So it's actually somewhere on the edge. It's on the edge. Very, very interesting. And it's actually reaching 25%. Okay. There's 0 on the inside, hardly anything on the outside there, but on that, coming into the edge area, there is 25%. And then the zinc, there's basically 0 on the outside and then on the inside. So where does the transition occur? The transition occurs there. Right. Of course it does. So the zinc and copper. So zinc actually is copper plus a proton. So this is remarkable. It's absolutely remarkable. If you would imagine this was contamination, you would, you know, he's got zinc and copper. It's like he's got brass, but on the inside. A little bit. I don't know. It's not quite the same, but anyway, there we go. So, wow. That is very, very satisfying. Okay, so I'm going to look at... hi, being here. Hi, guys. Hi, Space Case. Hi, Drav. Okay, so I'm gonna look at the images. Now, this is a bit of a mess, but what happened was, as I said, we had to stop the process of capturing the images, so it is not as we would want it. So let me drop this down. So I'm just going to look through these images, and we're looking along a row here. Okay, so obviously you're not changing the focus. So I can, okay, all right. Now I'm seeing this. It's this is making me sad, actually. Yeah, okay. So we've got the consumer things here. There's probably a light one here and a dark one here. These spots. Okay, all right. The reason it's making me sad is because I'm seeing the same thing that I saw on the key from the event. Ah, dear. I really don't want that to be true, but it does appear to be true. Okay, so like I say, much of it will be out of focus. This is why you need to do more study. So we're now on the second row. Okay, so we're coming into a zone here. No, not so much interesting there. Oh, okay. Again, we're back on. We're on the row 3 now. I think I'm going to have to do this again when I'm next on the SEM, and so we can see things in context. Okay, we're on an edge area here. A little bit out of focus. Okay, so we've got a ball in an area here, a ball in an area here, maybe a ball here. So whatever was happening was starting to eat through this material up this way. Okay, this is across in looking at some rusty areas. Rusty areas. Oh, okay, look at this. This is nice. So this is more of a structure. So this is the structure that still managed to survive to a degree. It's affected in a different way to the rusty area. Anyway, these are things that will all become clear. Here's a nice one. It's slightly deformed. I just wish it wasn't so, but this does remind me a lot of looking into the hole in the key from the event. Well, that's weird. Ooh, that's weird. Look, it looks like it's pinching. It might just be an out of focus feature in the background, but it definitely looks like it's pinching into this point. I have to look at that in more detail another time. I'm on row 7 at the moment. You see how it's much better if you have these things stitched together before you do this? Okay, there's a nice one here. Looks like a vortex anti-vortex pair there. I'll investigate that maybe next time. This is the mid-grey area and the dark area overlapping. Actually, this one, we've got a whole bunch here. Okay, so this is looking more like what we saw on the VEGA Valley, and I will investigate this further. So you've got what could be a collapsed D4D ring here, and you've got the segments going around, and so you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, maybe 10, I guess, segments. So it looks like one's broken out here. I don't know, maybe that's a smaller one grouped off to the side. We've got, okay, so this will become clear when I get a better chance at it. It looks like we've got a dark black, we've got a breaker here, carbon, and we've got a maker. We have I think we've got a breaker here and a maker here. So I want to have a look at this with a much more detail, but there was clearly, what you're seeing here is an area of where the disruption came to an end. Yeah, so you've got a breaker here and a maker. Breaker, maker, yin-yang. And this may be a maker and this is a breaker, I don't know. I'm going to have a look at that area in much more detail. Okay, so that's that. Right, so next one we are going to look at just a few microscopy, just optical microscopy images of the sword in the stone, as I'm calling it, and then I will explain why I'm calling it sword in the stone, if you haven't already guessed. I've talked about it in the past, about how I conceived it happening, but it's different to actually, with a high degree of certainty, now know the actors involved and their process and their means of action and what they do and what they result in and so on. So it's moved beyond gut feeling and intuition and based on limited data to something that is a little bit more verifiable. So where are we? Where did I put that? I'll show you the video quick so you can see how it works within the system for those that haven't watched any of these videos. I'm just going to skim through it. So here it is. And so you have the thing on the table there, and you can go through and you can see me looking around the sample here. So I'm approaching the edge here, and you can see these cutouts with the black spots in the middle. Maybe that's something interesting, and I will look at that in more detail another time. So I'm moving over. This is the area I zoomed into. That's the zoom in there, and I took some samples there and played around with the BSD, SED variation. So yeah, I'll make this public tomorrow. And so yeah, so you can see I'm just moved a little bit to the right, and I've got to the edge of the section that we're in question. And then this is the area where I took the line samples. And I moved around, so you get to see a little bit more of the arrangement of things there. Here, I don't actually even remember doing this. It was so quick. This might be rust clusters. However, it's interesting anyway. This is why it would have been nice to have access to a material much sooner. And then this is how it's accumulating the data for the line scans, which I've just been through. And then that was just me looking through quickly on the day. Okay. That's basically it. Oh, okay, what's that? Oh no, that's just another image. Okay. All right. That's me. So here's me setting up the tile, and this is the actual tile starting. Here we go. So like I say, we had to cancel it because I had to go. It'll show up here in a minute if I move it forward. So the tile builds like this, and it just drops the images down. But I don't have the composite image. Okay. All right. So let me find the image of the... So I've got some very, very high resolution images. We will have a look of the sample in question, the sword in the stone. And if I can find it, what have I done with it? Sword in the stone. There we go. Right, I'm going to load these into, not there. Okay. So this is this beautiful sample here, very classic knife, which is a sword to some people. And I took a couple of reasonable shots here at 50 megapixels, and these will be in the book Mr. Possible, which will be a photo book of some of the best of John Hutchison samples at extreme resolution and quality, never seen before, and then there will be an accompanying book which looks at the best understanding of analysis. So this sample was where this steel or knife sank into a billet of aluminium, and John cut the aluminium and then planed away some of the aluminium to reveal the boundary area where you can see both the knife and the aluminium. And interestingly, it's not just which one's in focus more. Here we go. Here, it's not just this aspect which has sunk in. You can actually see from where is it? This aspect. So I hope to get access to this sample here, the end sample, because I think it will tell us everything we need to know. Is it better in this image? I don't know, but you can see that the knife is actually in there, and he's just chopped off a little bit off the top of the actual knife structure. So you can see it's not like inserted at this point. You can see there it's the curve of the shape of the knife has actually aluminium that comes onto some of the top, so it's kind of locked in there. It's very much locked in. And I'm very, very thankful to the collector that allowed me access to this. Again, you can see the curved section of the knife. Maybe if I play with the contrast there, you might be able to see a little bit better, maybe not. So here's the knife here. That's the steel of the knife, and this is the aluminium, and you can see there's a curved section here where it's embedded in curved section, not quite so clear, but it is there, curved section. Anyway, I will have far superior images of this sample for the book when I get access to it again and take those samples. Now, one thing I found before we go in to look at the microscopy that I actually did just a few images of microscopy on this end section here. I noticed this after I took the photo, is this sphere of spheres taken out of the middle of the sample. There's another smaller affected area here. And this is very reminiscent of some other of John Hutchison samples where something occurred And this might have been a small ball lightning that occurred within the sample. And there seems to be this trail down here that leads into this pocket of material that seems to have disappeared. And like I say, I didn't notice this until I was looking at the photo later. But when we look at this is one of the things that I want to look at most, because I believe that when we look at this, we're going to see a lot of iron and maybe other elements. Where is it? Is it going to let me zoom into there as I want? Oh dear. Come on. No, not there. Sorry. If you're feeling sick, sorry. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Come on. Where are you? Oh dear. Can I just go like that? Okay. All right. All right. This. So you can see it's kind of come in here, and it's almost like a stomach. You've got the sphincter up here, and it's come in, and it's got this area here. Is this the best image I have it? I don't know. Let's brighten it up a bit. Okay, so there we go. And the reason it's so interesting is because we have these kind of segment structures in here, and this really, really excites me. And you've also got this cut area here, this cut area here, and so on. So I think this is red. That might be because it's rust, and the aluminium, the 227 aluminium goes to iron 54. And then there might be some sulfur in here and stuff. So I'm really, really excited to see this pocket in this sample and what that actually is. And you can see how that compares with the scale of the knife. It's actually quite a large section there that's chopped out. Okay. So yeah, this for me is the most exciting find post taking photos. And you often do this. This is why I'm very keen to always try and have the absolute best equipment to be able to take photos, because so often you'll see something in new data and then you'll go back and visit old images and you'll find, oh my God, it was there all along and you couldn't see the wood for the trees. So hopefully the process of doing the VEGA Valley analysis will have unlocked visual reference data for many people for years to come, to recognize, to see the wood for the trees, and to understand what this process is doing. So this is on the other side. So up the exposure. So you can see again, it's this same scallop process we saw on the knee. Okay, but obviously this is just one off to the side. Okay, all right. So now I'm going to show you the microscopy, which is just optical microscopy, and I just took a couple of shots around this end. And what I wanted to see is if I would see something that would point to the fact there being carbon there, and if there were any kind of structures that would indicate that something was going on. Because by this stage, I've already shared on the Hutchison MFMP sample fracture. We've seen the yin-yang structures meshing all over that, and that is a certain quantization level, and we've seen the same scale structures on the line reactor. So my hypothesis was that you get a mesh of these yin-yang structures that form over a substance, and then that can effectively be almost like a Star Trek shield. You could have something like a steel girder that was covered like this, falling off a building, and it would literally slice through a building. And as it's going through, the material it's going through would actually practically disappear. It might be converted to gas or dust, but the process would be so instantaneous. And so I imagine what was going on here is actually because we know that we've seen it on the fracture sample, that it would form on the surface and on the crystal grain boundaries. And then as the metal is on there, it's heavier than the aluminium, it's denser. And the aluminium is effectively slightly jellified. And as the metal falls through the aluminium, you basically have these things that are always on the surface. And the weight of the metal is pushing these things into the aluminium, and it's just acting as, like, if you can imagine a borer for a subway, You know, they have lots of little teeth that rotate on the front. You can imagine that is these yin-yang structures, and they're churning up and they're churning up, and they are on the surface of the metal of the aluminium, and the metal is the iron, the steel rather, of the knife is on top. It's pushing its weight down, just like Alex Pizarro did with his finger. Okay, so Alex Pizarro, he was working with John Hutchison, and there was a section of aluminum that had glowed and whatever, and he went to touch it. It was cold to touch, but moreover, his fingers went into the aluminium and actually left his fingerprint. And then as he tried to lift it, it smeared up, and he let go. You would obviously be a little bit freaked out if that happened. And then the whole thing froze, and it's actually got his fingerprints and where he grabbed it in there. So the ability to push into it is what the gravity in the push down of the relic neutrinos, let's say, or whatever is the mode of gravity, is pushing that down, and you've got these churners already on the top of the aluminium, and that they're just drilling their way in, and they're always and it just, as it flows around, it jellifies around. Okay, so secondly, I would expect that when these things interact with steel, we've shown you in the knee sample that the chromium is pulled out of the steel. Why is that important? Because that makes the steel go from a non-magnetic to a magnetic material. And John Hutchison has observed metals that are stainless steel becoming magnetic. Okay, whether they have monopoles in it, that's not so important as just being ferromagnetic. So how would that occur? Is that you're changing the phase of the metal. You're basically making a phase that has no magnetic property or ferromagnetic nature. You're making it into a magnetic property. And so you can literally see, and what I've just showed you, that the chrome appears to be separated. It doesn't get so easily integrated into the cluster, and the iron is interacted with. And then I believe what would happen when we look at this under the SEM, when I get access to it maybe later in the year, that it will create iron-rich areas on the surface, or absence of iron, and increased chromium on those boundary layers. So at some point, these yin-yang north and south pseudo-magnetic monopole structures will be able to interact with the stainless steel as well. So I would expect to see some damage in some places on that, and we're going to have a look at the microscopy. So give me a second, I'll pull that up. Okay. So it's just a few images, but I think we'll see everything we need to see. That is 5 images, and I've got scales on there, and I've got one that's got some measurement on it as well. It definitely needs a look at with the SEM. You'll see. Okay. So first up is one of these crevices. Now, one could imagine that a bit of dirt might gather in the crevice, but also we've learnt from Takaaki Matsumoto that the crevice is where you get the biggest clusters forming. And so this is a natural zone for clusters to aggregate. Okay, and we can see this area around here where we've got steel on the one side and we've got the aluminum on the other side, and there is a kind of like black area in between that goes all the way round. There seems to be some pitting that we've seen on the ball burn sample, around the aluminium, and there seems to be some areas chewed out of the aluminium also. And so it will be very, very interesting to do a more detailed characterization of this under the scanning electron microscope. Okay, here's a look at another area around. I think I can mesh these two together so you can see like that they fit together. Okay, and we go in here again. We've got these triangular sections cut out on the edge, triangular section, anti-triangular section, triangular section, anti-triangular section, triangular section, anti-triangular, so on. Okay, same kind of thing that we see on the VEGA Valley edges. So clearly there is this scalloping. This looks very, very similar, and in fact it's going into the aluminium here and going into the steel here. So this is probably the scale of the exotic vacuum objects. And of course, because they arrange themselves in a kind of sort of buckyball type hexagonal array, depending on where you cut through the damage, you will see different sections of the damage that occurred. Okay, so yeah, it almost looks like that they were actually binding to the steel more than the aluminium, and that may be the case. From looking at this, and we'll be able to determine this more when we look at the SEM. So again, this, if I wasn't to know better, I would say that this would almost be a color photo of what Matsumoto had in his book. So where is that? Let's bring that up. So here we go. Oh dear. So we look at that, and then we look at this. The only thing that we're seeing different here is that these are two different metals, and this is the same metal. Yeah. Okay, so here we go. This is steel on the right. This is aluminium on the left. Steel on the right, aluminium on the left, and we have this scallop and a scallop, scallop and a scallop. Okay. So for me, we've seen in iron or steel, clearly a chromium steel, that chromium got left behind, and that would leave, it means that the exotic vacuum object is more interested in the ferromagnetic material than it is in the chromium, and the ferromagnetic material being the iron. And so we're seeing something similar here. Palladium is, I understand, paramagnetic, so it has about the same interest in both both elements. Okay, so but for me, this is a complete win. I genuinely believe that this sample was created with the Hutchison effect, looking at the difference between this ball lightning effect and this ball lightning effect, which is the same effect in my view. And the fact that we've seen it on the knee sample that was fully within our control, and you'll see the live session on that. So it's just what it is what it is. So okay, again down here, yeah. So it looks like from what I'm seeing here now, it might be that because the aluminum is jellified, it will kind of like smooth out after the action has ended. But for me, what we are looking at here is the same effect, absolutely the same effect as was going on here. Okay, so we have some more images. Okay, I think this is interesting. This is on the other side, I believe. So again, we've got kind of a. All right, so I believe when we look at this under the SEM, and it may not be the case that we might have more. Okay, all right. So I think we might have actually caught one of these collapsed coherent matter structures here. So this is going to be absolutely wonderful to look at, really, really. And it'd be interesting to see what this element is that this structure is made of. So you can actually see this. This is your tooth. This is your thing that's eating away at the material with the hole in the middle, and it's boring away on the aluminium, and it's boring away on the steel more. Yeah. Do we see another one? Do we see another one? Hey, oh, we got another one here. Look, oh, in this case, it's not eaten so much into the steel, and it's eaten more into the aluminium. You know, you're interpreting very grainy images, and I didn't have the visual keys to be able to completely interpret what I was seeing here. It was kind of in line what I was hypothesizing was the mechanism, in part because I knew what Matsumoto had observed. But in this case, I can actually see the segments 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in this structure. Of course, this may look very, very, very different. You know, often when you look at something under an optical microscope and then you look at under an SEM, they are worlds apart from each other. But it looks like we've got one captured collapsed wave function of a EVO down here and one up here, and both in the process. This one's, in fact, this is on a flat surface and it seems to be eating more of the aluminium, and this is on the curved surface and it's eating more of the steel. Maybe there's something to be learnt from that. I don't know. But again, what we are seeing here is these scallop sections. Now, I have one reservation with what I'm saying there, and that might be that you can see the line of the tool here coming across when he was planing out the sample. And so it might be that the cutting edge of the tool ended up by creating this feature. But that doesn't account for what we see here, and it doesn't account for what we've already seen in the knee. But I have to say that now. Oh, look at this! I can't believe this. Look at this. Are these? I don't know. Now I'm almost extremely excited to have a look at this under an SEM. It looks like we've actually caught a structure, and it might have even died, and it's like in part in the process of gouging out some material there. I don't know. Okay, what else have we got? Okay, there seems to be something going on here. I don't know what that is. Needs more investigation. And that's a different shot of the same thing. Right, I've got measurements on here so you guys can work out what's what. So this is 1 millimeter. Okay. And if I go along here, these are all 1 millimeter. Okay. This is again 1 millimeter. This is 200 microns. So what's the scale of this boundary layer? I've actually measured that. So we've got it here. So the boundary layer here is about 200 or so microns. So this is about the scale of the mid-level exotic vacuum object we saw on the aluminium fracture sample. Okay. So, well, the smaller level, I think it's the mid-level. It was 1600, which is 444, and then that would be 4 would be a 100. Okay, so it's not quite. It's like twice the width of 100. It might be a yin-yang pair type distance. Okay, so I guess this structure maybe here is around about the same scale, but it'll be much better detail when it's under the scanning electron microscope. Okay. So, why am I calling this sample here? Why am I calling? Where is it? Let me show this full screen. Why am I calling it the sword in the stone? Why would I do that? Why would I do it? Why am I calling this sample the sword in the stone? Any guesses? Yeah, any guesses? Hi, son of Overbook. Glad to have you here. Okay. As I understand it, let's say Merlin put the sword in the stone. A lot of people believe the stone is the stone. Now, I've been to Tintagel, and I think it's like this kind of a area where you could imagine a lot of basaltic type rocks, and I've just done discussion on those, and obviously they may have magnetic components to them. But as I understand it, actually the sword was not in a stone. It was in like an anvil. So these were two dissimilar metals. If the sword was a sword that was non-magnetic, it would have been chrome, but it doesn't really matter. The idea is that the sword has its own form like a piece of metal like this. Okay? And it's in another piece of metal, and there will be a boundary layer around the entire sword as it's in the stone. Now, it's sitting down there in sunny Cornwall for a very, very long period of time, and it's exposed to the environment, and we know that metals exposed to the environment will accrue relic neutrino flux. So over a period of time, it would get richer and richer and richer in terms of its natural N radiation, its natural condensates of relic neutrinos. It would build and build and build. And they are just ripe for someone to come along with the right intensity and intention of spirit and capability to control these things. Perhaps Uri Geller would have been King Arthur. Who knows? But if they came along and they gave across their exotic vacuum objects from their hand as they touched it, and they used their intention to manipulate the exotic vacuum objects that are stored in the metal, that would accumulate and be most controllable at the boundary between the sword and the stone, the metal anvil that it was in, then you would have a scenario where that would start to churn, just as I believe we are seeing in this particular sample here. So on the boundary layer, on this boundary layer, there is a churning going on. The same churning caused by the same kind of structures as we observed in the VEGA Valley, Eastern Plateau, and the same kind of structures as I showed you on the triangular section cut out of the most affected area of the split part of the sample 20 Ni MFMP Hutchison sample. Okay, so what would happen then is you place your hand on, you put your evos from your fingers in there, and you start to intentionally control that. And some people, whether we like it or not, have just got more presence. Some people, you can feel their energy. You can literally, it's a real phrase, you can feel their energy. And when they walk into a room, they like emit energy. And it could be that someone that was the right spirit, the right energy, and was true. And where these things come from, it may be that all of so-called Merlin's magic, this mythical character, if he did have magic, well, certainly if he had control of exotic vacuum objects, then he would look like he had magic, as would anyone do who had control of this technology, which, as I've said, it clearly looks like HHO is the same kind of technology. Therefore, this doesn't need to be in overly complex technologies to start getting involved with. And alchemy would be the same technology. It's, not so complicated if you understood it. And so I believe that the sword and the stone could both be put in there by someone who understood the technology, not be taken out by someone who could not control it, and be able to be taken out by someone, whether they were just good enough at doing this in a natural way, like those boys did, that was filmed by Dr. George Eagley in, I understand, the 1980s in Israel. Like Uri Geller, like the people at the PK party, identified in the CIA document as whatever's going on is happening at the grain boundary. That person would be able to pull that sword from that stone. Moreover, the concept of a flaming sword, which is also in mythic legend, could be possible, because you have these structures which were identified by the US military, could be on the surface of a metal, and Bogdanovich showed them glowing for up to 2 days. Now, if these things were actually on the metal, but you didn't really physically see them, but you had an ability to charge them, like He-Man, you could charge your sword with lightning. You could then stimulate them to move from a kind of like nominal state into a state where they didn't affect your hand, like the Evos didn't affect the hands of Alec Pizarro as he touched the aluminum and left his fingerprints in there. Didn't affect your hand because we are designed to use this technology. But you could pass it through another person's blade and it would cut clean through it as if it wasn't even there. Because you had all these quantum coherent structures excited on the boundary layer that would just chew through anything, like instantaneously. And I've talked about this before. It's effectively a lightsaber. It's effectively a lightsaber. You get like a telescopic aerial. You would be able to charge the outside with the exotic vacuum objects, and it didn't matter if it doesn't have much rigidity. That would help. But you could cut through a range of different materials like butter. And in fact, it would actually potentially be completely removing the material. And so a flaming sword, the sword in the stone. There we go. So I have to thank the collector again for sharing this artifact with me, if briefly, but I look forward to doing a deeper analysis on it. I think with what I have shared with you today, looking at the sample 20, the fracture sample, sorry, not the fracture sample, the knee sample, and we are in here and here, and looking at this sample and going around and finding these structures on the edge and these scallop sections, which I believe are effectively exactly equivalent to these sections, but looking down a landscape of these that you can't see because this is a section. And the fact that the chromium is here explains the magnetic anomalies in steel that Hutchison observed. The fact that we actually have the physical representation of one of these actors that did the work in a pool of carbon, and the fact that we have elements that are like nickel, which may be in the steel, to be honest, but it doesn't appear to be on the bulk of the steel, but only on the inside, and that is a denser element than iron and would take an alpha particle from the iron, so it would be chewing a lot of the iron. But also you've got copper and zinc in this area, nickel, copper and zinc when there's no nickel, copper and zinc on the outside. There's a bunch of heavier elements in the area where it's removed. We have yin-yangs in there, it would seem, and I'm going to verify that. But if we do, that means you've got some maker and breaker. The maker will be making the nickel, the copper, and the zinc. And the breakers will be making the carbon, the silicon, the sulfur, and gases. A lot of helium, and maybe just a lot of oxygen. And basically gasifying and in part turning it to dust, but in part turning it to gas. And this is covered by the observations in the report by the CIA into psychokinesis party history, which I talked about in the early part of this presentation in order to make the necessary points to clarify which direction I was going in. Let me find that again. Where is it? Yes. So here, so you have the intention going in, and at the crystal grain boundaries, you have this ability by using intention and focusing it. So that is my sword in the stone philosophy. Having understood the science, there is both government-funded science in multiple nations that recognize this as a real phenomenon. You have experiments that we've done recently in the VEGA experiments that show the active structures, the active agents, these quantum coherent condensates that are able to chew and eat and transmute matter largely into carbon, which we observe here, and eat away at sections. And you even see the churning process as it goes down those channels. You end up with these scallop sections out. So all the data is aligning, and this spans many decades. So there's 1983. These psychokinesis party history document was published, or rather written, and what they saw in the samples that they analyze match what we produce in the lab in the VEGA experiments, match what Takaaki Matsumoto independently observed and what John Hutchison observed, and the entire package of data points to ball lightning, and therefore it is conclusive. For me, this is ball lightning. It's just ball lightning, and it's a real natural phenomena, and that is why the US Navy was very, very interested for such a very, very long time in the properties of ball lightning. All right, so if anyone's got any questions, I'll answer them. If anyone thinks I need to go over anything, please let me know. But for me, we're about a done deal in terms of knowing the basics behind what happened with the Hutchison effect. Okay, right. So Charlie C. Bob, are there EVOs in John Hutchison samples that you have not been able to recreate in Lion and VEGA? I don't believe that there are. I think they're just the same thing. Just the same thing. I mean, John Hutchison, I've talked about it in my ball lightning, my Hessdalen UFOs over Hessdalen blog. I have the article in there from the Electric Spacecraft Journal, I think from 1980s, where it's talking about his ball lightning generator. I think, Ken Shoulders says it's ball lightning, and they seem to parameterize. I think with looking further at the VEGA Valley, we will be able to clarify the parameterization levels, but already it's aligning with what was observed by Ken Shoulders. What you have to bear in mind is that Ken Shoulders had much lower fidelity equipment to be able to observe these things, and he also he's looking more of them in flight. So when we're looking at the coherent matter traveling waves, we're looking at them in flight. So that's kind of analogous. He also did look at witness marks in great detail, but he was generating them from a spike. So he tends to create the toroidal ones. The thing about the VEGA Valley, it was generated over 100 hours. And so the toroidal structures had plenty of opportunity to cluster into bigger clusters. And in the central channel, we see these larger clusters that are of the order, and in fact exactly the same size as the one found in the ball lightning strike in Hessdalen by the Italian research group. Exactly the same morphology, the substructure is exactly the same size, and the macrostructure the same size. So it is the same thing, it is ball lightning, that's the same thing, conclusive. And so we've seen those in the channel, but in where it comes over the eastern plateau of the VEGA Valley, you see these trails made by the ball lightning. And I think probably they were kept alive by the fact that it was still cathode, it was still feeding electrons. And I think the evidence that I'm seeing in the VEGA Valley Eastern Plateau is that during the switching off of the device, these things lose their ability to gain a plentiful electrons, and then that is the point at which they collapse and blow up or whatever. They can either be overdriven to collapse, or they can maybe just they just kind of like eat too much material or whatever. There's evidence on there that some of them collapsed after the power came off, and so there's a lot more to evaluate on that. But I think you'll see everything on that particular experiment. So for me, the VEGA Valley, and even Matsumoto's 1991 paper in his work on the road to his steps to the discovery of electronuclear collapse. It is the same thing. Everyone agrees it's ball lightning. It looks like ball lightning. It smells like ball lightning. And every level, it's doing what ball lightning should do. And so I don't expect there to be anything different in John Hutchison's systems. I believe that we have replicated John Hutchison conclusively in some experiments. I believe that Takaaki Matsumoto, without knowing it, was replicating John Hutchison conclusively, and I believe that even the Sapphire group, when they accidentally vaporized a $10,000 tungsten, they are replicating part of what Hutchison did. But of course, David Hudson did that many years before. Yeah, Edley Scarlin will have been employing exotic vacuum objects. And in fact, I talked about this in the past, and it's one of my slides from O-Day. And I have to thank, maybe I'll get that slide up, actually. Just give me a second. It's because I need to give the context to it. So what happened was Andrew Johnson, who, because I was having someone try to dox me and destroy my credibility and career in this volunteer process, which is an interesting thing to try and do to someone, by claiming I was crazy, talking about the event and how this might be related to this phenomena, which obviously it clearly is. Just disappointingly, it's just disappointing. Honest to see the structures in those knees and the arrangement of them. It's just, anyway. They were destroying me, and this had been like I don't know, it had been online for about 6 or 7 months, and I was going to the UK. I've spoken about this story before. I was going to the UK, and 3 days after, my colleague who works with me in the office here, who I share an office with, he said, "Oh, have you seen this? And this guy trying to dox you and call you bonkers and stuff." And I thought, no. And I looked at it, and on that same day, and bearing in mind this had been online for many months, there was a comment at the bottom by one Andrew Johnson, who says, you know, I don't know if Bob is bonkers or not, but what he's saying about the event is true. And so I through that, I was able to meet Andrew Johnson for the first time 3 days later, and he introduced me to John Hutchison. And I have to thank the person who tried to destroy me, and I did. When I saw him at the conference in Boulder, Colorado, ICCF 21, I spent an evening with him, buying him drinks and saying thank you for trying to destroy my life, because without your effort to destroy my research and make me an uncredible person, I would have never have met Andrew Johnson, and I would have never have met John Hutchison, and I wouldn't be anywhere close to understanding how this process works. And I thanked him profusely. In fact, that's all I had to say to him, was glowing thanks for trying to destroy me. And it's interesting because I started writing, I communicated regularly with Andrew about my emerging thoughts through 2017. And I then was talking about how this makes this yin-yang structure. I believe there's yin-yang involved, and this forces the energy into a localized space. And then Andrew shared this with me. And this is on the inside cover of Ed Leedskallen's 1936 Magnetic Current book. And he has two triangles pointing to a yin-yang ball. Two triangles from opposite directions pointing to a yin-yang ball. On the 20th of February 2018, Andrew Johnson, who I'd been regularly voicing my ideas to, sent a website with an image from the inside of Ed Leedskallen's tome called A Book in Every Home. Sorry, it's the A Book in Every Home book. It said, Edward built Coral Castle, apparently with anti-gravity technology. There we go. I think there is a group of people where this is an open secret. An open secret. It's depressing to know that. And it's been very clear to me for a long time, and I've made it clear to everyone that I know that this is clear to some people. But we're at a point where we need this technology to deliver what it can deliver positively for humanity, and not just let the negative aspects of how it can do damage to things and to influence people different aspects of understanding this technology. I've talked specifically today at length and with a reasonably full reasoning without the experiments that I did on myself to understand it at an early age. How solitary isolation damages psychologically people because they lose the social contact is not just that. They literally lose contact with the condensate through which their consciousness accesses reality. And so it's cruel when you understand this technology to do certain things. And it should be outlawed. It should be completely made illegal. It should be completely made illegal. So I've said that bit. Okay, I'm going to see if we've got any other questions, and then I might call it a night. Bob, did you look into Oleg V. Grishchevich's water torus generating using ball lightning cavitation as the active element? No, but I expect it would do. And I very clearly said on APEC, and I've been increasingly saying, and in fact, Ode says this, like all novel technology will be using this. And it's a bit of a problem because if you start on understanding this process, you will always end up at a natural phenomenon called ball lightning. But what it can do is so phenomenal. It's so phenomenal. It can literally make and break matter to the extreme. It's not called electronuclear collapse and electronuclear regeneration for nothing, right? And I didn't know this before I suggested that this would go and look at my red pill presentation. The lead into that was called make and break. Not without coincidence. This can literally make matter and destroy it. It is the God's toolbox. And we are on the dawn of an old age. We're going to get this back, but, you know, it's going to be an uphill struggle. But it's easier when you've got repeatable, predictable experimental data sets that can be done by people that don't have to have a load of letters after their name. They don't have to have a huge budget, and they don't have to be at some fancy institution. They just have to want to know. They just have to want the will to do it. Hello Martin, I have many documents and saved videos of John Hutchison. That would be great, Wobbly Boost. So the intention is as an extension to the project for Mr. Possible. We will produce, if we can raise the money, a full archive of all the material that's available, and so that we don't end up with a situation where the material is locked up for 50 years, as it is for some of the material for Ken Shoulders. Now, the argument is for some of the material for Ken Shoulders, it's locked up for 50 years because it's got family media in there, and that, you know, personal photos and stuff, and that may actually be the case. But when you look at some of the titles of the material that have been locked up, it's a little bit questionable as to whether that's the case. It would be great to have your contribution to make a full archive. And I don't want to be doing this when John's gone. John's here, and it's just it's wonderful to realize the intense value in what he did, and just because of a curious mind. I'm sure, Wobbly Boost, they were edited. You know, keep your stuff on multiple offline sources. That's all I say. Oh dear. Charlie C, how many types of Evo are there? Oh God, when does the clustering end? They're self-similar, but you can already see from the... I mean, what has been clearly agreed on by many parties is that they take the form of a torus or a sphere. And we have seen in the Vega Valley tori and sphere. And we've seen tori of tori. And we've seen structures that look like these things have aggregated into a sphere. So, but they even the tori, the original tori, are groups of spheres. So it's self-similar, but there's also a lot of variation, such that when you get to a high level of complexity in the clustering and aggregation, you can get something like the Vega Valley, which starts to look like an organic thing made it. And in fact, when you look into the Vega Valley, it looks like it's contained of organic structures. It starts to look like a whole world that's been built by electrons. And maybe the whole world and the whole universe is built by electrons. Daniel Foster, I like your comment. More angular momentum energy for human body, mind, and soul as an addition to humanity will exceed psychedelics for a time. Consciousness is so very key. So that is where human science fails. I think that's a very nice comment. I just want to make my own ball lightning generator and play with this stuff. Well, you can download Matsumoto's book and you can explore the simple experiments that he did in 1996 to generate the little ball lightnings and study what they do if you've got access to a microscopy of any kind. But it doesn't need to cost a lot. And all of the wonderful images of electronuclear collapse process in the back of his book here, which I hope to get the original access to the original micrographs so that I can rescan them. All these ones, you know, and we showed this the other day because we replicated that. We've replicated inadvertently without intending to do many of the structures that he's synthesized, and that's because nature always does the same thing. I mean, it's extremely variable, but you've got to recognize the pattern in the noise and not just seeing faces in clouds. I think that's what the Vega Valley has done now. It's just completely removed the faces in clouds argument. Hi, Stephen. Flaming but rubbery sword. No. It would be rubbery if it was aluminium or copper. It's not rubbery if it's a ferromagnetic material like iron or cobalt or nickel, right? So if you had an iron sword, then you could make a flaming sword. And also, I mean, the military landing gear that they were making, it didn't turn rubbery because it was just on the surface effect. Okay, so it would be about how you make the sword. There would be very good ways to make a sword that would be able to be. It would be flaming. It wouldn't actually have flame. It would be a plasmatic effect because the EVOs are excited. They're condensing matter from the environment, likely nitrogen and oxygen, okay, onto the surface. And as they do that, they emit energy which excites the atoms around the sword, making it look like it's flaming. But if it's excited enough, when you pass that through another metal, it would be good at damaging other things. Let's put it like that. That were metal, more than organic material. If you've got carbon, because carbon likes to be kind of like part of an EVO in a different way. It's like when with a Mars gas, you can cut through steel, you can cut through you can cut through steel, you can cut through or damage or dishevel titanium and tungsten very, very readily. But if you add carbon to it, it doesn't do that. It doesn't do that. So it's more like, you would have a holster that was leather. So I think it's Benjamin Franklin, when he was studying lightning, he was fascinated by the fact that people that got struck by lightning, they could find that the metal parts within the scabbard had kind of like glooped together, but the leather holster wasn't burnt in any way. And so he had already recognized electron clusters and exotic vacuum objects long before they had a name. And so if you had a leather wrapped around the metal, you would have increased isolation from the sword, but at some point you would want to be connected to it to give your intention to switch on the flaming sword. Anyway, that's my little bit of craze for the evening, but I think there's actually a scientific basis for these things to have occurred. Could one bring objects out of reach closer to them? Well, potentially. I haven't thought too much about that. I like to think about what it is I know that that's a claim of people that say you can do telekinesis. If you could create in metal at a distance that you control, so I would believe you would need to touch the metal. You literally need to touch it. And you could create the exotic vacuum objects in there that are willing to bow to your will, your intention, and that you could then direct them to, how should we put this, to consume the, or rather to shield gravity on one side and not shield it on the other. And by that I mean the thing that causes the action of gravity, being the relevant neutrino flux, which is a pressure on everything, then it would go in that direction, if you understand what I mean. So just thinking about it on the fly, that would be the mechanism that I would say would be doing that in a telekinesis way. Rajput says, and the dishes can wash themselves. I like it. Yeah, so the whole thing about the sword and the stone is, with a transmitter and receiver, they are able to communicate on the same level. If you can put something into something through a mechanism, you should be able to get it out of that in using the same mechanism. Okay, and so you've all seen the videos of John Hutchison where you have like a coin and it's moving around and then it just goes inside another piece of metal, typically aluminium, and this is the same thing with this sword and the stone, and this would be the same thing that would be used by a magician, a master of the arts of the natural phenomenon of exotic vacuum objects, and he would put it in there with this technology, knowing that only someone that had a extraordinarily either known or natural and unknown ability to control these things through the ways that they're controlled, like Uri Geller and like these other people in Israel that were filmed by Dr. Eagly. That would be the sort of person that would be able to get there, and it would tend to be, in my view, a younger person, because you need people get jaded as they get older, and they stop believing things are possible. And when you look into your children's eyes, you can see that they know all things are possible, because they can do it in the head. So surely it can be done. And it's a shame that the creativity and the ability of the human mind is beaten out of people by education and by the system, such that they end up becoming, automatons to a degree. And I'm sorry, but that is the case for a vast number of people. I'm guilty of myself of believing all kinds of nonsense that has controlled the possibilities that I thought were possible in life, and I'm realizing that I was imposing impossible belief structures on myself because of social norms, and it would have been a young person who knew that they could achieve great things and hadn't lost that childlike passion for discovery and for delivery. And to a certain extent, that is John. I mean, John is like that even now. He's like always able to think that things are possible, not really caring how it actually occurs when he's doing it, just knowing, I know I can do this, and I'm going to put that with that, and it's going to work. And it's kind of like an ontological thing where you have an end point and you will it into existence. But on the flip side, there is real science behind it. There is a real mode of action. Okay, so I'm going to see if we've got any questions. Did John Hutchison use an abrasive disc sander or a band saw to cut through the sample? I can check with him. Obviously, if there was an abrasive disc sander, that would potentially explain some of the maybe the elements that are involved. But that, in my view, is not the case with Takaaki Matsumoto's sample, and it's not the case with the John Hutchison MFMP sample 20, the knee, which we showed at the beginning of this. And both of those show the same structure that I believe that we are seeing on the Sword in the Stone. So Daniel Foster says, more than anything, I want to either double or teleport a water moon in Venus orbit. If it's the last thing I do, that's a wonderful ambition, Daniel. And let's make it so. Yes, Gordon, it's not melting. It is some form of manipulation of the electrons that normally bond a metal lattice together. Corky, this is what is hidden, a cult of hiding it there. Yes, I agree. Drav Rajput, yes. We're at the dawn of an old age and there are glorious times ahead. Yeah, no heat required. It's not a thermal effect. Okay, I'm going to have a look down the bottom there. I'm probably going to call it a night. I've had 3 presentations or Q&A, live Q&As in 3 nights, and it's been quite tiring. That's an interesting comment from Wobbly Boost. He says the word magic and derivatives come from the word magnet. And magnet, if you look at what I was presenting with the work of Rodinov and Savatimova in the presentation on Friday, they are arguing that there are these string elongated nuclei that run through everything, these kind of atoms, and that they are in magnets, and at one end they suck in the relic neutrino flux, and out the other end they spit them out. And in my view, this is probably to do it's something to do with what this whole process is. It's certainly intensely magnetic. What's the potential for EVOs for teleportation? I think it's extremely high. I have this sample called the meteorite, and my understanding is that it was growing by a capacitor in the corner of John's lab, and that I believe it is a lot of these cores of ball lightning or whatever, and I'm looking forward to testing that at some point. It just found itself as a target location because of whatever was in that part of the lab, and it aggregated there. And it's not just these cores of the ball lightning, I think, or other materials were in there, like a lump of quartz and some plastic stuff, and all aggregated into this blob, which I call the meteorite, because it's just this aggregation of all kinds of things weird. But ball lightning is known to travel through, for instance, glass. And I've explained this in the past, where if you can imagine an electron, and Ken Shoulders says like an electron is one electron, a Cooper pair is two electrons, but as a condensate, or as a Cooper pair. And then if you have a tauon or a muon, they're like muons like 217 masses of electron, and tauons like, I don't know, 3,700 or something, whatever. And he says they're all just clusters of electrons, or in that kind of concept. And he says, like, but I create things with billions worth or 100 million electrons, and effectively, because they become coherent, they are a single quantum entity. And it's a bit like 2.45G Wi-Fi can go through a wall, but 5G can't go through a wall as easily. It's because the interaction with 5G in your home, 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi, interacts with the matter more, and that should concern people. The higher the frequency you go, the closer you get to the interacting directly with matter. But anyway, the 2.45 doesn't. It maybe does on resonant nodes, but it doesn't interact so much. And you've got to think that that's because the wave is less in tune with the dense matter. Now, if you have a normal electron, it will be 100% in tune with normal electrons, which means you don't fall through the ground that you're standing on, or I don't fall through the seat that I'm sitting on here, because all of the electrons in my body are the same type of electron, the same quanta level as the ones that compose the chair, and the chair is sitting made of the same type of electrons on the ground, so I don't fall through the ground. But if you could imagine that I was in a structure where the structure itself was completely out of tune with all ordinary electrons, itself, the whole structure, could pass through not ordinary matter. And you could accelerate that, because ordinary matter might be the main cause of any kind of resistance. It basically wraps around it. It's like its own quantum, it's like its own bubble of space, which isn't seen by ordinary matter or ordinary matter in a space or volume. And so if you had a craft that was covered in this bubble, or enclosed in this bubble, you could, as I'm going to show another slide from O'Day, actually, because it's a good one to talk about here. Where is it? Taking flight is up here. Is it? Where have I got it? Is it down here? Let me search. Okay, there we go. Oh, is that the one? Okay. Right, there's two slides that are relevant here. I think I've shared both of these. I've certainly shared the second one. Okay. So the first slide here is relevant to the things that I was discussing about particles coming out of these disheveling structures. So this is shishkin, and this is the particles shooting out of a disheveling soliton. And this is Adamenko, and these are the pits that he observed. And I think maybe I've got a animation here, maybe. This is Shishkin's umbrellas, and that's 50% through a mushroom. And I believe it's something like this arrangement, or maybe inverted. And this is on Lion. But Tesla said that he mentioned a particle beam device that could be made self-existing. That is to say that it could be made to generate as much energy as it needed to operate, and then some. So that's a particle beam device. But the one that I'm referring to here is, how about an aerial navigation? Dr. Tesla was asked. He considered for a moment or two, and then replied with great deliberation. The application of this principle will give the world a flying machine unlike anything that has ever been suggested before. It will have no planes, no screw propellers, or devices of any kind hitherto used. It will be small and compact, excessively swift, and above all, perfectly safe in the greatest storm. It can be built of any size and can carry any weight that may be desired. And that was published in The Sun, New York, 110 years ago. Tesla promises big things. And so essentially, I believe that just like ball lightning can walk through stuff with matter in it, because it's not effectively in the same universe, yeah, it's basically a magic carpet. In fact, if you had a carpet with metal threads in it that was able to create exotic vacuum object field around a person, then you could drive it by intention. You could do something like that. So yeah, so essentially what we're saying here is that he's saying something of any shape, any weight, can travel through any environment without any kind of resistance. And that's exactly what we're talking about. Yeah, Odd One X. I discussed my thoughts on the David LaPont video in the APEC, the American Anti-Gravity quick Q&A yesterday. So I'd ask you to look at the replay of that on Jeremy's channel, on Alien Scientist channel, or I should be given a copy of it to upload to the MFMP channel. Yes, Corky, this is our cosmic heritage. I believe that's how our species, or at least the genetic intent of our species, got here. And it's how we will leave. And there's no other practical option. It's how we will terraform other planets. And it's how we will be able to do everything we need to become, once again, a fully intergalactic species. Okay, so I'm going to say thank you for everyone for joining me tonight. This was... I'm not going to do a full review because I did that earlier. This was something that I've wanted to talk about for a long time. A long time. But it's one thing to want to talk about something, but I wanted to have conclusive, repeatable, and convincing evidence to be able to get my point across. This was Hutchison Effect, sword in the stone. And I believe through data spanning as much as 50 years plus, we have been able to demonstrate how this sword ended up in this stone. The stone in this case is not a stone, as it isn't, as far as I understand it, a stone in the case of Merlin, where it was an anvil that it was placed in. And that is two dissimilar metals that were interacted with, and then someone of the right capabilities came along and did what Thorsten Ludwig is investigating in Berlin, related to the Hutchison effect and the work of these psychic programs, where you are able to control the electron validium, the charge clusters, in order to place into or remove the sword from the stone. I believe that there is a lot more we can learn from this sample when I look at it later in the year, hopefully under SEM, as part of the book that we will produce for the life and times and exploits of John Hutchison. The visual book of that will have extremely beautiful images in there, and that will be called Mr. Possible. And so that's that. And I'm very much looking forward to finding out what is down in this area over here, this little nick that came out, because that alone will tell you potentially whether this was involved with ball lightning, but certainly I expect it was. And there we go. So there may be more to myth and legend. Certainly there's a lot in religious texts that would go along with this kind of technology, things like crossing the sea by parting the oceans and so on. And it's interesting because if you know where the ocean was crossed, the sand has been turned into a glassy like substance there, and so I imagine ball lightning technology was used to cross the ocean there. And walls of Jericho, all kinds of things, that where it's clear that this technology was used. Okay, so thank you very, very much for your time. This was Hutchison Effect, Sword in the Stone, and we will see more data on this later in the year. I'll have a lot more data to share with you when I've looked again at the knee. I have to say thank you very much for everyone's support over the years to get us this far, and we're going to be coming into a very interesting period, I'm pretty sure of that, where we can deploy the certainty of how this process works in active technologies which don't involve doing unpleasant things to people, and we can actually leverage its capabilities for positivity for humanity. And with that, I'll say buenas noches, dobro noc, good night, buenas tardes. It's been a pleasure. Bye bye.